Former UFC star BJ Penn was arrested yesterday for the third time in 6 days.
Where Penn is accused of assaulting his mother, and prosecutors want him to undergo a court-ordered mental health exam.
This isn't something where I'm like, yeah, right on. Look, I told you you're not my mom. Well, that means, where's my mom? You know, these are just crazy things, crazy times.
I think BJ, in his own words, would go back and do things differently if he could.
Oh man, it's so sad to watch this CTE. CTE! Billy, that's M-E-T-H. Meth!
Going from the prodigy of Hawaii to public brawls and delusion. This is the devastating fall of BJ Penn, a man who conquered 2 weight divisions only to lose the war against himself.
BJ is too tough for his own good. BJ might not be knocked out, but the shots that BJ took would have knocked out a normal human being.
Born and raised in Hilo, Hawaii, J.D. Penn wasn't supposed to become a martial arts legend. He was just another rich kid from the islands, the son of a successful businessman who could have lived comfortably without ever throwing a punch. But something inside this young Hawaiian burned differently. While other teenagers were surfing and partying, Penn was obsessing over combat sports, driven by an intensity that would define both his greatest triumphs and his most spectacular failures. At 17, Penn made a decision that would change everything. He packed his bags and flew to California to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Ralph Gracie. This wasn't some casual hobby. Penn attacked Jiu-Jitsu with the same ferocity he'd later bring to the octagon. He lived and breathed the art, spending countless hours on the mats, absorbing techniques, developing a ground game that would become legendary. Within just 4 years, Penn achieved something that shocked the martial arts world. He became the first non-Brazilian to win the black belt division at the World Jiu-Jitsu Championship. Think about that for a moment. A kid from Hawaii, barely in his 20s, had just conquered the most prestigious grappling tournament on the planet in Brazil, the birthplace of the art itself. The victory wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. Penn had proven that American fighters could compete with and defeat the best Brazilian grapplers on their home turf. This wasn't luck or a fluke performance. This was pure skill, dedication, and an understanding of jiu-jitsu that few foreigners had ever achieved. The Brazilian crowd that had come to watch their heroes dominate instead witnessed the rise of a new kind of fighter, a dangerous one. When Penn stepped into the UFC for the first time in 2001, he brought with him a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His debut against Joey Gilbert was a statement fight. Penn dominated from start to finish, showcasing the jiu-jitsu skills that had made him famous while also revealing dangerous striking abilities. The performance was so impressive that UFC matchmakers immediately began planning bigger things for the Hawaiian phenom. This wasn't just another prospect working his way up the ladder. This was a fighter who looked ready for elite competition from day one. Penn's rise through the lightweight division was meteoric. He possessed a rare combination of technical brilliance and natural athleticism that made him nearly impossible to prepare for. His jiu-jitsu was world-class, his boxing was crisp and powerful, and his cardio seemed endless. More importantly, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who knew he was destined for greatness. When he spoke about becoming champion, it wasn't hope or ambition, it was certainty. In 2004, Penn faced Matt Hughes for the welterweight title at UFC 46. Hughes was considered one of the most dominant champions in the sport's history, a wrestling powerhouse who had destroyed every challenger put in front of him. Penn was moving up in weight to face a man who outweighed him significantly and possessed the kind of wrestling pedigree that had neutralized countless opponents. Nobody gave the Hawaiian much of a chance. Penn didn't care about the odds or the size disadvantage. He walked into that octagon with the confidence of a man who had already seen his victory before the fight began. What happened next shocked the MMA world. Penn didn't just defeat Hughes, he dominated him. Using his superior jiu-jitsu and surprising strength, Penn controlled the champion on the ground and eventually secured a rear naked choke that forced Hughes to tap out. The crowd erupted as Penn became the new welterweight champion, proving that technical skill could overcome both size and wrestling when applied by the right fighter. But Penn wasn't satisfied with conquering one division. After losing the welterweight title back to Hughes in a rematch, he set his sights on the lightweight championship. This was unprecedented territory in the modern era of mixed martial arts. Fighters typically found success in one weight class and stayed there. Penn had different ideas. He wanted to prove he was the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and that meant holding titles in multiple divisions. In 2008, Penn got his shot at lightweight gold against Joe Stevenson at UFC 80. The performance was vintage Penn. He controlled the pace, landed devastating strikes, and eventually opened a massive cut above Stevenson's eye that turned the fight into a bloody mess. When Penn secured the rear naked choke in the second round, he had achieved something truly special. He was now a two-division champion in the modern UFC era, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest fighters who ever lived. Penn's title reign at lightweight was everything fans had hoped for. He defended against Sean Shirk, submitting the former champion with a knee to the body that dropped him before finishing with a rear naked choke. He followed that up with a decision victory over Kenny Florian that showcased his complete skill set. Penn was in his prime, looking unbeatable and talking like he knew it. This was the peak of his powers, the moment when everything he had worked for since those early days training in California had come together perfectly. But success in mixed martial arts is fleeting, and Penn's decline began almost as quickly as his rise. The sport was evolving rapidly, with younger, hungrier fighters bringing new techniques and training methods that began to expose weaknesses in Penn's game. His cardio, once seemingly endless, started to fade in later rounds. His motivation appeared to waver as he achieved the goals he had set for himself. Most damaging of all, Penn began to believe his own hype, assuming that talent alone would be enough to continue winning against increasingly dangerous competition. The warning signs appeared in his 2010 fight against Frankie Edgar at UFC 112. Penn entered the bout as a heavy favorite, expected to overwhelm the smaller challenger with his superior skills and experience. Instead, Edgar used superior footwork and cardio to outwork Penn over 5 rounds, claiming the lightweight title in an upset that shocked the MMA community. Penn looked slower, less motivated, and unprepared for the pace Edgar brought to the fight. The rematch later that year went even worse, with Edgar dominating more decisively and leaving no doubt about who the better fighter was. From there, Penn's career became a series of increasingly difficult defeats against younger, hungrier opponents. He moved back to welterweight but couldn't recapture his previous success. Losses to John Fitch, Nick Diaz, and Rory McDonald showed a fighter who was clearly past his prime, but unwilling to accept reality. Each defeat was more painful than the last, not just because of the physical damage, but because they chipped away at the legacy Penn had built during his championship years. The final chapter of Penn's fighting career came in 2019 when he faced Clay Guida at UFC 237. Penn was 40 years old and coming off a string of devastating losses that had many calling for him to retire. The fight against Guida was supposed to be a softball, a chance for the Hawaiian legend to get one final victory before riding off into the sunset. Instead, it became another embarrassing defeat, with Guida controlling Penn on the ground and earning a decision victory that highlighted just how far the former champion had fallen. When the UFC released Penn shortly after that fight, it marked the end of one of the most remarkable careers in mixed martial arts history. But for Penn, leaving the cage would prove to be far more dangerous than anything he had faced inside it. The transition from octagon warrior to barroom brawler began almost immediately after Penn's UFC release. Within months of his final defeat, disturbing videos began surfacing across social media platforms. The same hands that had once choked out world champions were now throwing wild punches outside dive bars in high-low. The grace and precision that defined his fighting career had been replaced by sloppy, desperate swings of a man who seemed to have lost all sense of timing and distance. The first incident that gained widespread attention happened in August 2019. Cell phone footage showed Penn engaged in a street fight outside Lava Shack Bar on the Big Island. The video was painful to watch. This wasn't the calculated aggression of a professional fighter. This was chaos, desperation, a man throwing haymakers with no technique or purpose. Penn landed several shots before bystanders intervened, but the damage to his reputation was far more devastating than any physical harm he inflicted. Days later, another video emerged from the same confrontation. This one showed Penn on the receiving end of the violence, getting knocked unconscious by the same man he had fought earlier. The imagery was brutal. A former two-division champion flat on his back outside a Hawaiian bar, completely helpless as strangers gathered around his motionless body. The UFC wasted no time cutting ties completely, releasing a statement that Penn would never compete in their organization again. But the bar fights were just the beginning. Penn's behavior became increasingly erratic as 2019 turned into 2020. Neighbors in his upscale high-low community began reporting strange incidents. Penn would show up at their homes at odd hours, making bizarre accusations and rambling about conspiracies that made no sense to anyone listening. His speech patterns had changed, becoming disjointed and paranoid, filled with references to people plotting against him and his family. The domestic violence allegations came next, painting a picture of a man whose demons had completely taken control. Penn's estranged wife filed for a restraining order, claiming he had threatened her life and exhibited increasingly violent behavior toward their children. Court documents revealed disturbing details about Penn's mental state, describing a man who no longer recognized the people closest to him and seemed convinced that his own family members had been replaced by imposters. Law enforcement encounters became routine. Penn was arrested multiple times for driving under the influence, each incident more concerning than the last. The booking photos showed the physical toll his lifestyle was taking. The lean, muscular frame that had carried him to championship glory was now bloated and soft. His eyes, once sharp and focused, appeared vacant and confused. This wasn't just the natural aging process of a retired athlete, this was the systematic breakdown of a human being. The conspiracy theories became more elaborate and frightening as time went on. Penn began posting rambling videos on social media, claiming that government agents had infiltrated his inner circle. He insisted that people close to him weren't who they appeared to be, that they had been replaced by actors or doubles as part of some grand scheme to destroy him. Friends and family members who tried to help were accused of being part of the conspiracy, driving Penn further into isolation. Former training partners and fellow fighters watched in horror as their friend disappeared into paranoia and delusion. Chuck Liddell, who had known Penn for decades, spoke publicly about his concern for the Hawaiians' well-being. Other fighters shared similar stories of trying to reach out, only to be met with suspicion and hostility from a man who no longer trusted anyone around him. The breaking point came in late 2024 when Penn was arrested for allegedly threatening a family member with a weapon. The incident report described a man who was completely detached from reality, making threats that seemed to come from a person living in an alternate universe. This wasn't just another domestic dispute or bar fight. This was evidence of a complete psychological breakdown that could no longer be ignored by the Hawaiian court system. In January 2025, a judge ordered Penn to undergo a comprehensive mental health evaluation. The decision came after months of escalating incidents and mounting evidence that the former champion was no longer capable of making rational decisions about his own safety or the safety of others. The evaluation would determine whether Penn needed to be involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility for treatment. The tragedy of Penn's story extends far beyond his personal struggles. His decline mirrors that of countless former professional fighters who have suffered the long-term effects of repeated head trauma. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, has become an increasingly recognized condition among combat sports athletes. The symptoms, including paranoia, aggression, and cognitive decline, match many of the behaviors Penn has exhibited over the past several years. Medical experts who have studied Penn's case from a distance point to his fighting style as a potential contributing factor. Throughout his career, Penn absorbed tremendous amounts of punishment, particularly in his later fights when his defensive skills had declined. The accumulation of thousands of punches, kicks, and wrestling exchanges may have caused irreversible damage to his brain tissue, fundamentally altering his personality and decision-making abilities. The role of fame and sudden loss of identity cannot be understated either. Penn spent the better part of 2 decades being celebrated as one of the greatest fighters alive. His entire sense of self was built around being the prodigy, the Hawaiian warrior who could conquer any challenge put in front of him. When that identity was stripped away through a series of humiliating defeats and eventual release from the UFC, Penn may have struggled to find meaning and purpose in his new reality. The financial pressures that followed his retirement likely contributed to his mental decline as well. Despite earning millions during his championship years, Penn's lavish lifestyle and poor investment decisions left him facing serious money problems. Former champions who once commanded 7-figure purses, suddenly finding themselves struggling to pay basic expenses, often experience severe psychological distress that can manifest in dangerous ways. The Hawaiian community that once celebrated Penn as their greatest sporting hero now watches helplessly as he continues to spiral. Local businesses that once proudly displayed his photos have quietly removed them. Former fans cross the street to avoid encounters with a man they no longer recognize. The transformation has been so complete that many longtime residents of Hilo struggle to reconcile the Penn they see today with the champion who once brought their small island global recognition. As Penn awaits the results of his court-ordered psychiatric evaluation, the MMA community grapples with uncomfortable questions about the sport's responsibility to its former athletes. How many other fighters are walking around with similar brain damage, ticking time bombs waiting to explode in spectacular fashion? What obligation do promotions like the UFC have to provide long-term medical care for athletes who generated billions in revenue during their careers? Penn's legal troubles have created a ripple effect throughout Hawaii's tight-knit community, where everyone knows everyone and secrets are impossible to keep. Former training partners who once considered him family now speak in whispers about interventions that failed and phone calls that went unanswered. The man who once commanded respect through skill and dedication had become someone people feared encountering in public spaces. The restraining order filed by his wife painted a chilling picture of domestic life with a former champion. Court documents described a man who would disappear for days at a time, returning home in states of extreme agitation and paranoia. His children, who had grown up watching their father compete on the world's biggest stage, were now living in fear of his unpredictable outbursts and increasingly violent threats. Local law enforcement officers who responded to calls involving Penn described encounters with someone who seemed to exist in a completely different reality. During one arrest, Penn allegedly insisted that the officers weren't real police, but actors hired to intimidate him. He demanded to see their real badges and identification, convinced that nothing around him was genuine. The delusions had become so severe that Penn appeared incapable of distinguishing between actual threats and imagined conspiracies. The transformation became even more heartbreaking when former teammates attempted interventions. Chuck Liddell and other UFC legends tried reaching out, hoping their shared history might break through Penn's paranoid wall. Instead, these gestures of friendship were interpreted as evidence of the conspiracy he believed was targeting him. Penn would analyze their words for hidden meanings, convinced that even his closest allies had been compromised or replaced by imposters. Social media became Penn's primary outlet for expressing his fractured worldview. His posts grew increasingly incoherent, filled with accusations against neighbors, family members, and business associates. He claimed to have discovered elaborate plots involving identity theft and surveillance, posting blurry photos that he insisted showed evidence of people watching his home. Followers who had once celebrated his fighting achievements now watched in horror as their hero publicly unraveled. The financial devastation that accompanied Penn's mental decline only accelerated his spiral into chaos. Legal fees from multiple arrests and court proceedings drained what remained of his fighting earnings. Property taxes went unpaid on his Hilo home, leading to foreclosure proceedings that Penn interpreted as another attack by shadowy forces working against him. The stress of potential homelessness likely worsened his already fragile psychological state. Hawaii's small-town atmosphere, which had once provided comfort and stability during Penn's championship years, became a prison during his decline. Every public appearance generated whispers and cell phone cameras. Local bars began refusing to serve him, not just because of his violent history, but because his presence made other customers uncomfortable. The island that had celebrated him as their greatest athletic export now treated him like a dangerous stranger. The story of BJ Penn serves as a brutal reminder that legends aren't immune to destruction. From conquering 2 divisions to courtroom battles and psychiatric evaluations, the prodigy became a cautionary tale about the hidden costs of combat sports. Sometimes the most dangerous fight happens long after you leave the cage.